Hey everybody, I wanted to give an overview of the Constitution and some major themes throughout Unit 2. So the big thing to keep in mind about the Constitution is it is a reaction to the disaster the Articles of Confederation created. And the thing you really want to keep in mind within that reaction is that concept of federalism, the division of powers between the federal government and the state governments, with the balance of power in favor of the federal government. So it was all agreed that the Articles of Confederation created a very weak federal government within a time that was very dangerous for this young republic. You had Great Britain, which was still eager to get its colonies back. You had France, which was eager to, at that time, expand its holdings in North America. You still had Native American nations that were very eager to push back against this new republic. And the economy was in shambles. It was in shambles because the war itself put a lot of the states in tremendous amounts of debt, and like most wars, created a boom and bust economy. And the federal government was intentionally weak, so there was no way for the federal government to regulate the economy, to create a uniform currency, uniform trade laws, all of that stuff that we take for granted the federal government can do today. So when they meet in 1787 in Philadelphia, again, out of reaction of the Shays' Rebellion, again, they all agree that the new Constitution, however it takes shape, must create a stronger federal government. Now, this immediately creates tension between the two prominent sections of the country, the North and the South. The North, under the Articles of Confederation, those state governments already began either outright banning slavery or had made provisions to phase it out. So now that this new nation is being formed under a new federal government that is going to have more powers over the state, the southern states are becoming increasingly anxious at the time of the Constitutional Convention. And led by South Carolina, there's growing anxiety that the Constitutional Convention is going to end in failure. So what to do about that? What is done about that is that the Constitution, in large part, is a document that is going to protect the institution of slavery, meaning it's going to protect slave-owning interests to keep them satisfied so they will stay within the Union as early as 1787. How is this done? Well, let's take a look. And let's take a looking at this guy's writings here, Frederick Douglass, who was one of the most prominent abolitionists of his time. Now, this learning objective is reflecting back on the Constitution. It was written in, I think it was, 1849, and he's arguing with other abolitionists who were trying to convince Frederick Douglass that they could abolish slavery through the Constitution. And he's arguing, no, they cannot. So looking at what he writes here, the constitutionality of slavery. Just to read briefly right here, the Constitution of the United States, what is it? Who made it? All right, those are two good questions. What is it? It's a legal document that binds the various states together under a stronger federal government. Who made it? Well, a great deal of the people who constructed it were slave owners. The so-called father of the Constitution, James Madison, was a slave owner himself. For whom and what was it made?
This is what he's talking about here. It was made to protect slave-owning interests. It is from heaven or from men? Obviously, it is from men. It's a rhetorical question. But this is a good point here. Sometimes
even back then, and today the Constitution is revered almost as a divine document. It was written by men who had particularly very specific commercial and material interests that they wanted to protect. And what's significant about this is that it really underscores the sectional differences between the North and the South. So do read through this. He gives some good arguments about slavery and how and why the Constitution protects it. But the thing you want to take a look at too are some of the pieces of evidence that he shows in here that protect it. Now, the main way that it is protected is through the three. And so what the 3/5 clause did is it was an argument over population. So you had the so-called Great Compromise in the Constitution, which was a combining of the New Jersey Plan and the Virginia Plan. The New Jersey Plan wanted to base representation in Congress based on just the inherent power of the state. They wanted to maintain the supremacy of the state, like the Articles of Confederation did. Virginia argued, so each state, in other words, would get one vote, like the under the Articles of Confederation. But Virginia argued that no, that would dilute the power of our population. Our population would be underrepresented. So they wanted to base representation in Congress on population. What they did, this is why it's called the Great Compromise, they combined both of those to create the bicameral legislation that we have today, which is to have a House of Representatives, which is based on population, and then to have a Senate, which gives each state 2 votes. Now, this is where the South got concerned. If the North, which is a more populated region of the country, got together, they could outvote the South and conceivably abolish slavery. So their first solution, led by South Carolina again, was to say that we want to include our slave population as part of our population so we can have greater representation in the House of Representatives. So keep that in mind, right? The North says, no way, you can't do that. These are slaves, right? So they hash it out. They have huge arguments over this issue. And finally, again, compromise. 3/5 compromise. Slaves will be counted. 3/5 of the slaves in the southern states will be counted towards the population. To give southern states greater representation in the House of Representatives. Now, this does a number of things. It just doesn't only give the southern states more representatives in Congress. It also is going to give them the greater likelihood that they will be able to send more people to the executive. More people from the South will become president. It's not a coincidence. And this has a lot to do with the Electoral College. The Electoral College numbers, the number of delegates each state gets, is directly correlated with the number of representatives a state gets along with the number of senators. So each state gets 2 senators, so they at least get 2 delegates through Electoral College, and they get X number of delegates based on how many representatives they send to Congress. So with increasing the number of representatives that the South has through the 3/5 compromise, this also gives the South greater power in the executive branch. In turn, it's also going to give them greater leverage and power in the Supreme Court as well, because it's the president who appoints the Supreme Court, and it's the Senate that will confirm that appointment, right? So since it's the president that puts forward the nominees, the Senate usually goes along with. It's very rare that the Senate rejects the nomination. So because of that one thing, the 3/5 compromise, it's going to give the South an inflated sense of power within the federal government, and that was to placate the fears of the South the anxiety of the South when it comes to slavery. And so when it comes time to ratification, when the Constitution is written, it goes to the states, and the state representatives in the state assemblies look over it. That's the one thing that they're looking in the South. They are in the South, the state delegates, the state legislatures are satisfied with what they see, and they indeed ratify the Constitution over this issue of slavery. So I want to make sure you understand that, because it really does build a foundation, especially for the next unit, this tension that is developing over the issue of slavery within the North and the South.